we can go anywhere you guys want to go here. But there was an interesting situation that happened at the Mills 24 when a boat hooked the mark and sailed away with it. So let's go through the rules first of all about what you have to do in order to race around a race course, right? You need to honor the mark. So I'm going to try to bring in rule 28, and that's what it talks about sailing the course. So what the definition of sailing the course is: a boat shall sail the course. A boat may correct any errors in sailing the course, provided she has not finished. So when we have to look at the definition of sailing a course, and I think that's the most important. Then we can talk about the interpretation of what that means, right? So what does sailing the course mean, right? It means that she starts and a string representing her tack until she finishes, or track until she finishes when drawn tight, right? So we've all talked about, you got to be able to wrap the string as you go, and you pull it tight, and you've gone around the marks, okay? So passing each mark of the course for the race on the required side, and this is what we'll talk about with the incident at the windward mark, right? And the correct order. Obviously, you got to go around the windward mark first based on the sailing instructions. You got to go through the gate, and I think that's another one that is very important. We had an incident in Charleston last year I'll talk about. So pass each mark of the course for the race on the required side and in the correct order. And it needs a touch of each mark designated in the sailing instructions, right? And then passing between the marks of the gate. So we had an incident in Charleston last year where we were sailing the 24s. There was 2 years, it was last year. Sailing 24s, and we were on starboard tack, downwind, and a boat had passed us to windward. And we wanted to hold them to the ley line and then jibe and come into the gates. We had an incident. They jibed, we jibed. There was a protest. They actually sailed outside of both of the gate marks. They didn't go between the two. And they rounded the left gate properly, but the string did not go between the gate. So, and you gotta, and that's an incident you gotta remember. You gotta go between the gates. So even though you're only rounding one gate, it still has to honor the other gate mark. So that was one of the issues we had up there, right? All right, so if you think about the scenario that happened in Davis Island, one of the boats hooked the mark and started to sail, I guess, horizontally to the wind, and the boats behind them actually just bore off and I believe rounded the offset because now the windward mark had moved, but they had still not rounded the mark that was being moved by the competitor. So one of the things there, when you look at this rule, let me read another thing here. Stay with me for a second, okay? I'm looking for the exact kind of definition here of what they're saying. A mark is an object specified in the sailing instruction that defines the course. If the object has moved, dragged, or drifted, but is still clearly the mark being used, it remains the mark. Okay? So you could say, even though that mark was being moved by another, it was pretty obvious that was still the windward mark. And that's kind of the premise of what they're saying here is, as long as this still looks like it's the one the mark, it still can be treated, even though it may not be anchored, it may be moved. Okay? So, but it's still clear being used. It remains the mark, and boats are expected to leave it to the required side. So that's the interpretation. Okay? Now, there's some definitions that come along with that. Let me talk through that. The race committee's actions. So let's think about this. If they're, hey, the race committee did something wrong that moved the mark, we could protest. You could file for a redress and give you some rights to be able to get redress for that. But if the committee realizes the mark is significantly out of position, they have some options. They can reset it, they can shorten, or signal a course change. Okay? So we've been there when the mark, like the Leeward Gate started floating away. We still went around it. It still appeared to be the right mark, for the course. So in that regards, it still was a fair, opportunity for everybody that sailed that race. So that's the race committee's kind of process, right? They can reset it, shorten, or signal a course change. But when somebody's dragging it, it's not really a scenario that there's something they can do about currently in that. So the next one is the missing mark. You can replace it. And here's the key, which I think will be important for the Davis Island scenario, right? Is the third scenario is if the moment that it creates unfairness. So let's say somebody grabs it and they start reaching off, and there's people that have already rounded, but the other people behind cannot get to that mark and round it properly. Then it becomes an unfair scenario, right? Based on an action of another competitor. And that's where you still have to round it and file for redress. You just can't miss it like, oh, it's too far, I'm just going to go downwind and keep going. You still have to round the mark no matter how far that mark gets moved, and then file for redress. So let me say it one more time the way the verbiage is. If the movement creates unfairness, this can become a redress issue, but boats generally should sail the course as it is in the official instructions, right? So you still, no matter how far they go, you still have to round it properly and file for redress. And that was the key for that scenario. Does there anybody have any questions on how it's kind of defined in the racing rules of sailing? Seth, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right.
And in that scenario, there was almost nothing that race committee could have done differently. And realistically, the boats that were aggrieved were the ones that had already rounded the mark because everybody else got a lot closer. So they likely would not hear anybody who was behind redress for them.
Well, the people that
Just
didn't
in my
round the mark
experience.
didn't sail the.
Oh, correct. Yeah, no, you have to round the mark.
Yeah.
But just in my experience in protest hearings, what they do is they look at who was physically grieved.
Yep.
And it's gotten even easier with the Vacros data. And all that happened was the ley line got easier because it moved closer to the offset. So boats that were not laying the mark were magically laying it, and everybody got closer to the front of the fleet.
This happens, obviously, it happens a good bit. So let's talk about a scenario where we have a mark bot and somebody's coming in and they're very tight on making the mark, and they actually hit the mark and start pushing it to leeward. Enough that once the mark wants to go back to its position, all of a sudden when it clears the boat, motors to windward a boat length and hits another boat. Does the boat that just got hit, can they file for redress for that? It's no, not under you. The thing with the mark bots, they will go back to where you have to sail it as if it's going to go back to where it belongs. And if it starts to come back or moves at the last minute, which they do, it's not a redressable scenario. It's something that we all have to understand and sail, and still make sure we could go around the mark. So there is a scenario there that the mark bots will move, and they do move. Sometimes they'll move a half a bot, sometimes they'll move a full bot length. I mean, I've seen them move, like on the IC-37, I saw it move probably a boat length and a half back to where it was going and hit 3 boats on the way. So it does happen, and that's something you just have to plan ahead for, right? You're coming into the windward mark, you see that somebody's on it, like, hey, I don't know where that mark bot's originally going back to. I know I'm going to have to go a little farther off the ley line before I actually I don't want to cut it too close, because once that MarkBot gets clear and can get its direction and its GPS, motors back in its right position, it'll get back there.
Marty, the other one I've seen it do quite a lot is if it's blowing about 10 to 12 or higher, as soon as you create a wind shadow for it, it does shoot up. So if it was held on station, as soon as you give it a wind blanket, they do shoot about 2 marks forward.
Yep, you got to give the MarkBots live. And I, talking with David, especially in Davis Island, when they use those anchored marks, they use a lot of road. They don't use the little, kettles to keep it down. So, really giving yourself a wide berth there always is a great thing. I mean, I don't know how many times in Davis Island people have put marks. I mean, it happens quite frequently. So, all right, just to go back and summarize a little bit is, again, the string test is always a good one, right? You start, you go through, you make sure you've completed the course. If you can pull that string and it's touching the marks as it was stated in the sailing instructions. Now, whether it's moved or not, and it's moved significantly or not, that's another question, whether you file for redress that based on some unfairness is the words that's being used. So you can file for redress if you feel that it was unfair that this mark was moved by a competitor and made it unfair to me compared to the rest of the competitors. And what else on that topic? Going through the gates. Yeah. That's what I have on that scenario.
Well, and I think that's really good. And one thing that always happens at Davis Island when you're doing perf is like, say a storm comes through and we lose C mark. The competitors always have to round where it used to be. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion is, I would think. And still, I mean, are you actually finishing the race? But that's what was considered to finish the race.
So in order for that to be proper, they would actually have to give you coordinates. If C mark is GPS coordinates, and you have to leave that coordinate to starboard or port, right? You have to leave it to some side. If it's just not there anymore, then that to me creates a whole different another problem, right? If there's no mark there, then what do you do?
Yeah, and I think I heard one of the other teams saying that too. Well, this has happened before in, a beer can race. And so I think that's why this is going to be a really good series, because we can talk about really how class rules differ and it'll improve us all together. So we really know the rules.
Well, again, U.S. sailing rules apply really to everything we do, unless you go through and you change the rules via the sailing instructions, right? Mm-hmm. So, that's really where, and sometimes the Thursday night stuff gets a little blurred because it's not as written and defined. So, that's where problems start to happen too, right? Is if it's not really defined properly and done properly in the sailing instructions, and then you get ambiguity, and then issues start to pop up. But the goal here is to really try to, again, understand, the racing rules that apply basically to everything, whether it's PHRF or, offshore. I mean, it really all is the same thing. And we just got to make sure we all look at it and understand it and apply it across the board.
Okay, Marty, maybe for a future one, one thing I've seen a lot of older sailors who did not get the amendment about 10 years ago, where you could tack in the zone as long as you did not push a boat above close hauled. Yep. That's another rule that I think does need to be covered with some depth. That poor sail trim does not mean that somebody fouled you.
Right. I can tell you a funny story that we did the FAR 40 Worlds in Chicago. And we had judges, and the racing rules stated that we could not protest. Everything had to be decided on the water. So any scenario, you yell protest, you raise a flag, and the on the water judge will make a decision. But what happens if they weren't there or they didn't see it? So it actually, in my mind, did not work very well. But we had a scenario. We were on. Let's go through that rule real quick. I know we can talk about a million different things, but I think you're right. It's a rule I think a lot of people struggle with, and I think it's a rule that it's not exactly precise. We're getting better when I mean precise, because when are you in the zone, right? And when you tack in from port onto starboard, it makes a difference if you're in or outside the zone. The good thing now is with the Vaqueroses, it'll let you know if you're in the zone. And we can talk a little bit about this, but I think, Seth, it's a very long-term discussion.
It almost needs to have a presentation.
We only have like another 10 more minutes, right?
Yeah, that one needs to be its own separate. That's going to take a full term.
Well, maybe we can do that next Monday would be good, but we could definitely touch on it a little bit to.
So here's one of the things. Once the fleets get bigger, coming into the port ley line at the Woodward Mark gets very difficult for a lot of reasons. Am I right, Gary? Especially the first leg, it's very crowded. You're trying to either lee bow a boat, make it around the mark, or you're trying to duck a boat, be able to tack and make it around the mark. So if there wasn't a mark there, a port boat has to stay away from a starboard boat. So if I'm going to do a lee bow, I'm allowed to tack as close as I can, as long as I can complete my tack before the other boat has to alter course. And that still applies whether you're in or outside the zone, right? I mean, it's just port starboard, I tack. If I tack and you have to avoid me before I finish my tack, I'm wrong no matter if I'm inside the zone or outside the zone, okay? The difference is if you're inside the zone and you tack clear ahead, and the boat that you tack in front of on starboard has to go past close hull. Not luffing your jib, none of that. It's past close hull. So one of the indicators a lot of people look at is the jib luffing. So these are indicators that, a lot of people will be overstood. So they'll be reaching into the windward mark a little bit. And if you tack to leeward of them and they harden up, but they haven't gone past close hull, you're fine. You're still okay. That was a legal maneuver. So you can see how very difficult it is to be able to, I was outside the zone. The good thing now is if we have a protest in a scenario, we have the Vaqueroses that will tell us two things. Did we tack inside the zone? And did the other boat behind us go past close hull? Because we have a track, you can watch their track and see roughly if they were past close hull. So the data really makes a big difference when we start to get in these scenarios. The J70 class is the absolute worst of people coming in and just slamming it in there all the time. And a lot of people they know won't protest and they just do it. And to me, that really ruins our sport. I think the more that we can hold people accountable based on the rules, the better the sailing is, the more people will track to it, the less people will get frustrated and leave our sport. So I'm a good proponent to make sure that there's rules, let's use them.
So the flip side of that is it actually does make the port tack lane actually a lot more attractive, in my opinion, because in a lot of these boats that don't have a huge penalty for tacking because they tack quickly, you end up with the first boat is laying the mark and usually right on ley line. The next boat goes on their hip. So they are one boat length above ley line. Now you're 5 boats in, you're 5 lanes above ley line. So after the first 2 or 3 boats, you can almost guarantee that none of those boats actually had to go above close hull. They were all bow down to the mark.
Right.
So that's the
100%.
But you have to gauge where they are, and if you see the first boat making it, and you know that they were above that lane just because they put their bow down and then they shoved it up really hard last second because they wanted to shut the door, does not mean you fouled them. And that is where I would love to have Marty or somebody draw 1,000 scenarios, but Genoa, Todd, they did an awesome job teaching it. And they're actually Dave Perry did a great job explaining it. But after that third boat, you have almost every right in the world to come in there on port tack as long as you can track where they were.
Well, again, as long as you can tack clear ahead.
Yep.
Right? And the boat that is behind you doesn't have to go past close hull.
But typically you'll see the boat on starboard, they'll put their bow down and try to hit you. And that's where
you can close the gap, right? You can early on, it's not like you're hunting that boat. That's a whole different scenario, but you can come down and close the gap when that boat is 2 or 3 or 4 boat lengths out and hit your course when they go to tack. They don't have to be close to home when you tack, right? So we'll go all through these scenarios, and I think it is one of those things that everybody, it's hard to execute, hard to be clear on. And, how do I know you weren't close haul? It's your opinion versus mine. But the good thing is the data will help us kind of prove that a little bit. And again, everybody, you don't want that boat to get in there, but you have to go by, like you said, Seth, there's going to be a gap, obviously, after about the third or fourth boat that people go in and take advantage of it.
And especially if you've got a Marty coming down. He's going to be bow down at you. He's going to be doing 7 knots. And he's going to he wants to close that gap. So you cannot tack clear ahead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and you can put your bow down and then come above close haul to avoid them. There are things you can do on starboard to ensure that you have rights, but you have to understand the rule.
Exactly. We'll go through all those scenarios next time.
Yeah, I think we should definitely touch on that one next time. That'll be really good. And so I think this is really good. So we'll do this each Monday, just a half hour, nothing long, and go over these things all summer because you're really gimped up anyway. So it's a good time to do it.
This is, as all of you know, this is my passion. So happy to help and share and do all that stuff.
It's going to make us all stronger out there. And so I think this is really good. And I love the way you did this too. So can you recap this rule so that we all are on track on this one?
Yeah. So again, the rule that we're sailing under is what number is rule 28, right? This one, right? The boat shall sail the course. And the definition of the course is here, right? It's the string test. That's the course. So if anybody argues, well, you didn't sail it. Well, did you tighten the string? Did you touch every mark? Well, but it moved. Well, no, that's not what it says, right? We'll worry about the move part later, right? Going through the leeward gate. This was a world champ gentleman that missed it and didn't get it right in Charleston last year. You got to go through both gate marks. Now, what happens sometimes in the sailing instructions that if one of the gates is not present, you leave it to port. Well, that's great. What's present? How far away is not present? That becomes a little bit of an interpretation. But you have to I've seen that scenario not go very well either. So do the string test, and then you can file for redress if it was unfair, right? If there was the mark moved and it was unfair for you because of another competitor, another scenario where you couldn't round the mark, you file for redress, but you still have to round the mark.
Perfect.
Sound good?
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so much, Marty.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting it together. It's really awesome.
Yep, that's going to be good. So I'm going to go ahead, we tape this, and I'm going to put it on our Melges Fleet's new YouTube channel, and then we'll keep growing these and making sure. And then 5 years from now, we're going to go, what was that rule again? And go back and watch this one.
Yeah, so maybe, Nadia, I would highlight the 2 or 3 rules he had covered there. That way we can reference the video.
Right. Rule 28, right?
Yep.
And sailing the course are the 2 key words.
Perfect. Yep, I'll put that in there so we can reference it.
Marty, we're going to have to get you a fancy little evolution background for your...
That's true.
When you do these.
There you go. Work on that one.
Thank you guys so much,
guys.
Nadia, for organizing. Marty, thank you so much for giving us all this great knowledge and input.
Yep, and we're going to keep going with them. It's going to be good. All right, thank you guys. All right, we'll see you out there.
Bye.
Thanks, Marty.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.